Welcome to the DaoLens Discord space. So excited to have you here. So excited to dive deeper into your story. And we've had a conversation before, so I know how phenomenal your journey has been, and how relatable it's been, starting with Bankless DAO and stuff like that. But before we get into it, I would just love to ask you, what was your introduction to the world of crypto? How did you get started in the Web3 space?
Yeah, so I've kind of been an entrepreneur for about 10 years now. And, I'm currently the host of a podcast called Quorum, which I think you mentioned and we'll get into later. But, it's about helping people understand like what it's like to work in Web3. And I launched this show back in April when I received a grant from Bankless DAO to fund the show. And we used blogging to help educate people on the power of CBD. And we ended up selling over $12 million worth of products over our lifespan of the company. So we did pretty well from my perspective. And, I learned a lot about helping educate people on like what is typically a misunderstood and confusing topic like cannabis. So, honestly, that's one of the reasons that excites me about Web3 and DAOs is that it's so new and it's so confusing and it's actually hard for people to understand. It's hard for me to understand what's happening in this space. So I kind of wanted to eat my own dog food and learn about the space and share what I'm learning with other people to make it easier for people to understand what it's like to work in Web3. And there's a lot to say about that.
That's phenomenal. So what product were you guys selling at that point? Was it cannabis itself? Was it product and accessories related to it?
Yeah, it was, you could consider it an online retail store. So we had all of the different categories of products from tinctures to topicals to ingestible, capsules and vaporizers before there was a whole hubbub about vaporizing. So we kind of sold all the different types of products and we really curated a set of the top brands that we thought were in the space. I kind of like to showcase other people's work. You see that with what I'm doing on the podcast. I think there's maybe a sense of collaboration that I want to like share all the great people out in this space. Yeah. That's what you're doing here now on DaoLens, not just me, but other people who have come on this show in the past. Like you're giving a platform to people who have something to say and hopefully can add value to people. And I really like doing that. I like sharing, other people who are worth highlighting in the space. I think that's fun and it helps, show what you like in a very novel way.
That's amazing and that's phenomenal. It's not that easy to start a business, and once you do, to have a profitable business is a whole different ballgame. So congrats on doing that, and congrats on pursuing a business which was so like closely entangled with your passion and even a mission that's close to your heart. I think
thanks.
That's really amazing, and that really works out when you're having hard days and you're wondering why am I even doing this, but when it's attached to a mission and stuff, like those days like really get you up in the morning. So
yeah,
that's absolutely amazing. So you started this business. What was the transition into thinking, oh, I want to dive into Web3 at this point, and now you have discontinued with the business?
Yeah, so as businesses do, they come and go, trends come and go. We had a really great run. We got launched back in 2014. Back then, nobody knew what CBD was. I had to explain it to everybody who I talked to. And, times change. When 2018 hit, the US Farm Bill happened and that really opened up the doors, legally for people to feel more comfortable with selling CBD. And so the market just got flooded with more competitors, more investment money, more products. I mean, it was crowded, and it is very crowded today. So, I chalk up a lot of my success, if at all, to just being at the right time in the right space. And that's kind of what Web3 feels like to me right now. Everybody here on this call listening in or listening to the podcast is early, people say it, but it's true. Like you can see it in the bear market, and it's nice and you recognize that you can actually make a difference because there's so much opportunity. So To circle back to your question, my business, came to a natural close after 8 or 9 years. We just got beat by competition, and I felt comfortable, like that was the natural way of things. I learned a lot from that, which is what I considered my first business. And after it started to close down, I went back to listening to more great podcasts, and I heard the Bankless podcast, which really struck a chord with me. And they were talking about how Ethereum was kind of the next nation state. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, this is going to like eclipse governments or something else. Yeah. And so it really kind of opened my mind to like, whoa, something interesting is happening here in crypto again. And it's not just financial. So that's when I decided to dig in more.
That's phenomenal. And I know how hard it would be to run a business around that, even though you were passionate about it. But I feel like those courageous acts has brought the state that we're in today, where, you see, even the states talking about it's, going to legalize cannabis and stuff like that because it has so many amazing medicinal benefits and so on and so forth. And so many negative aspects of it, like people would just like be put in prison because they were caught with pot, which is just like baffling to think about.
Yeah.
And I feel like, actions like these is helping normalize things on so many levels. So that's amazing on your part. And
thanks.
Coming back to the journey of you starting a podcast with Bankless, it's one of the most interesting stories. Sometimes you see people and you feel like, oh my God, I love what they're doing. I wish I could do it. But I feel like once I actually listened to your story, it was so relatable on how anyone can do it. You were just curious enough and you really, really went ahead and pursue it. So I'm going to let you take the stage and talk about Brendan previously, ran the famous Bounty Hunter podcast by Bankless, which is on most of our Spotify playlists anyway. And now he runs Quorum, but he has one of the best stories to tell on how he started with Bankless, how he started with the Bounty Hunter podcast with Bankless. And I'd love for you to talk how that entire journey looked like.
Yeah, well, thanks for the compliments. I don't know if it's famous, but I do enjoy doing it. But I can share really my journey into Web3. Once I listened to the Bankless podcast and I found out that they had a DAO, I was like, oh, this sounds cool. I'll just jump in the Discord, see what's going on. And this was a Friday, and I remember they had their community calls on Friday, and I happened to find out through that call that there was a project called the Podcast Hatchery. And basically it turned out to be an accelerator for creators of podcasts and people who wanted to create content. And I thought, that sounds awesome. This would be a way for me to get involved in the space, learn from people in the community, and try to add value to what they're doing. It felt like a really natural partnership because I've always considered myself someone who cares about education and wants to help share that with other people. So like the inception of me finding out this project in Bankless, that was like, yes, super exciting. But then the act of me getting fundraising for it was pretty rocky, to say the least. So when I got into the hatchery, it was my first kind of calls on Discord. Everyone had pictures that were like a cow or something random, and I didn't know what I was doing. So you only hear voices, and it was just very weird and mysterious. And so some part of me was like really excited by all this, and another part of me was really kind of like nervous. Like, I don't want to step on people's toes during this meeting. And anyway, so the point at which I got involved in the hatchery, they were ready to invest in making new shows. So they were looking for new show creators. And I put myself forward as wanting to be one of these creators. So we had this meeting at nighttime. I remember kind of pacing around my room, and they were debating about who they should get. And, again, I was just like, well, I would love to, if you guys think, here's my idea. And, they said, okay, well, we'll put it to a vote tomorrow, and we'll go through the process. And so we put it through a vote, 24 hours or 48 hours later, and I'm like dead last in the group. And, part of me was like totally crushed because I'm like, oh, I thought I had a great idea. But the realistic thing was I hadn't made any friends at the DAO at that point. Nobody knew me. So it was like, okay, I get it. Like, I understand. So anyway, I decided to stick around, and just try to add value. I became the secretary, just taking notes on the calls. I suggested to also run the meetings. I thought the meetings could run a little better, so I just proposed that I had some ideas for how to do it, and they were like, "Yeah, you can just run with that." And then maybe like a couple months into this next season, I got a message from someone named Eureka John, who's a really great contributor there, and it sounded really urgent. And he said, "Brandon, someone who's running the podcast that we funded just quit the program," and he said it was because of burnout, which I know we might talk about as well on this call. But that's just obviously such a huge issue in this space. And I was so conflicted. I was like, on one hand, this guy's, can't make it and he's suffering from burnout. And on the other hand, I really want this opportunity. So I told him, yeah, of course, I'll take it. I'm ready to go. And, they were just excited kind of to get me to swap in and take their place. And from there, I think, we as a team, I've got a great editor and a couple marketing people who really help with the content itself. We've been able to show like we can hit our milestones, we can make things happen, and the grants process is a little messy if you've never gone through it. So that was our first experience trying to get fundraising for the show, and it's been a little more smooth sailing since then, luckily.
Phenomenal. Whenever I hear this story, it all started with just joining a community call, right? I feel like in the chat, if you see, our Hobie Billy has said, he's been in the crypto scene since late 2017 and have so many opportunities present themselves just by offering help and being a cool dude. And I feel like that's the crux of this point. Whenever people want to join a DAO or any community, they start like spamming. They're like, okay, what can I get out of it? Do I want a grant? Do I want someone to hop on my podcast? But you were there, you existed. And that is what in the DAO world is somewhere called reputation management, right? Building friends, making friends and building relationships, and how easy, like not smooth, but somewhere it was much more of a smoother and organic relationship than anything else. I think that's amazing, and that is something like people should take notes of. And what I love is, again, you see a Web3 opportunity translating into a real world opportunity, right? Like you run this podcast, it's on Spotify, it has an amazing website, and it all started with you joining a Discord community. So that's really, really amazing and such a right way to go about it. Like really spending time in communities, and you'll have people be there to help you out. So I know someone might even quote it as lucky, but like you really persevered. Even if they didn't select you in the first go, you stayed there, you existed, and you offered help. And eventually, things came your way. So I feel like that's another really, really great learning point.
Yeah. I mean, I've had tons of times when people have said no to me, and you just got to keep trying it. If it's something that you really want to do, it was like, yeah, that sucks, and I really want to try to make this work, so I'm just going to stick around and see what happens.
Yes. And did you have any familiarity with how DAOs work, how grants work, before you applied or tried any of it?
I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. Yeah, no, it was super messy. I mean, I was a typical like DAO lurker at first. I hopped on the calls. I didn't say much. I kind of maybe messaged a couple people afterwards and ask some questions like what is this wallet thing, and how do people get paid, and what kind of projects are y'all working on? Like it was very confusing to me, especially in Bankless. If anybody here is also in Bankless, you'll recognize just how crazy busy that Discord is. They've maxed out their 500 Discord channels. They have 10,000 plus contributors. I don't know what the current number is, but the number of opportunities there is just insane. So yeah, as somebody who's just coming on now to figure things out, it's both one of the craziest places to join, but also there's so much opportunity and such a diverse set of places where you could land.
Yeah, I feel like what I'm noticing is just hopping on a general chat and asking questions. You'll always have community managers to help you out, and even just attending community calls, like you'll have the right people be there. I think that's an amazing place to start. But Brendan, what made you choose to, even like you said, lurk around DAOs or be a part of DAOs out of all the Web3 things, from NFTs to crypto? Like, what made you choose to work around DAOs?
Yeah, I've never really been like a finance guy. So DeFi wasn't really interesting to me. I don't really even know like what slippage or liquidity mining means. Like there's so much in the DeFi space that I have no idea. It's just very over my head. And then I think NFTs are very interesting. Obviously, they have a role in DAOs, so there's a significant overlap there. But I've never been an art collector myself, or consider myself an artist. So I think NFTs are fun for kind of speculation and their access to other projects. But I still think that there's still a lot to be developed there. And then when I heard about what DAOs were, I was like, well, this is just a new version of a company. And it's using the same technology of Bitcoin and Ethereum. So that was just something I could wrap my head around. And it just felt really tangible to me and obvious that there needs to be a change kind of in this ecosystem of where the current stage of work just isn't working for a lot of people. Like the 9 to 5, 5 days a week just doesn't, it seems broken to me. And I think DAOs aren't the only thing that can change that, but they are definitely on the forefront of innovating in that space. And that is really exciting to me.
Absolutely. But I'm sensing a lot of these two side of stories from people, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it. Where people see how revolutionary DAOs are, the advantage they bring to the table, right? The freedom, the permissionless nature, the almost no gated communities, versus you still need a lot of DAOs are still very, very centralized. Like there are few people making decisions. So do we see DAOs becoming something where you have mass adoption, where, there are hundreds of thousand people in the DAO? Or do you see that, there are few DAOs and there are like core 10 to 15 members and that's all they care about, because not everyone is a quality contributor. So why would you go ahead and manage a huge community when you just have like a few number of people? So how is it that you see it? What's your perspective on it?
I think it depends on what kind of DAO you're talking about. If it's something like an investment DAO, then maybe having a core team, and a little more centralized decision making makes sense with a broader community that can bubble up ideas. But there's other types of communities too, like service DAOs. I think service DAOs could be huge. If you're a marketer and you want to join, Jump, the marketing DAO, or Vector DAO, you're a designer, and go and hang out with other people there. I think there's a chance for those to be incredibly large. I'm saying I think there's place to experiment between those ranges. Right. Personally, I think that the smaller in scope, slightly more centralized versions of the DAOs that I've kind of interacted with seem to have a little bit more grip on business use cases and how to make money and be self-sustainable.
Yeah.
But I do think we're still kind of early stages. I'll give an anecdote about Bankless DAO. I had a conversation with somebody from the grants committee, Lynx, who's a great guy, and I also had on the podcast previously, and he was kind of just sharing. I was talking to him about like what it means to receive a grant and like, is there an expectation of like paying back the grant? And, he said something interesting to the effect of like, if Bankless DAO gives out all the money from the community into these projects and funds these projects, and those projects go on to fund and do other things in the ecosystem, almost like a tree, like shedding its seeds, and the seeds grow into other plants and so on and so forth, then we'll have done our job. And I was like, wow, that's really it. Like I hadn't thought about potentially using a DAO like that, but it's different than, coming from Web 2 world where it's like, you need to make a profit, you need to bring in the income, or you're not going to be around much longer. So yeah, I think there's different use cases for it. And what I'm excited most about the space is that you can experiment with all of these. If you're a contributor out there, go to somewhere like Bankless where they're really high on the innovation side and high on the decentralization side, low on centralization, and see how that feels. Like, does that work for you? There may be reasons why it doesn't work, like compensation, but we can talk about that later. Yes. But yeah, that's basically, you can go out and play.
That's super exciting. I feel like that's such an interesting answer. You ran the Bounty Hunter show. What was one of the most interesting guests you had, or what was one of the most interesting insights that was there?
Yeah, I think there's so many interesting people out there in the space. I really like what Yuri Lifshitz is doing over at SuperDAO. They have a product that helps you create your DAO from just a wallet address. It's a very slick interface. And him and his team are just they're like hyper learners. Like this, Yuri went on and just interviewed founder after founder after founder and like built this product. He's like your typical Silicon Valley builder type. So he's someone I look to like when wanting to learn more about DAOs, how DAOs work, like their perspective. On the more like social side of things, I think what's happening over at Disco is really interesting. They still seem to be kind of slow with the rollout of everything that they're doing. But Evan McMullen, if you want to learn about reputation and identity in Web3, I think she's the person to talk to, hands down. She's got all the explanations. I couldn't properly do it justice to explain how she does, but yeah, it opened my eyes as to like all of the huge issues that we have in Web 2. You know, think about Twitter and all the ways we use Twitter right now and how we can't even take our followers other places, right? That's something that Lens is working on, which I hope to have on the podcast as well. But those are two that come to mind. I'll also throw in there Kraus House. I think I love what they're doing too. That's one of those examples that makes it clear like Web3 can be very tangible. Like a bunch of people who love basketball who want to own a team. Like nothing could be more rudimentary than that. And I think it's those kind of use cases that are going to bust through all of this, the crypto bubble, and out into the mainstream. So those are kind of some of the people I'm watching these days. There's a long list, but I won't bore you.
No, not at all. I've made a note of it because I feel like there's so many people who are doing so many things behind closed doors, and it's hard to find until the top 100, top 200 DAOs, right? So I've written the names down to make sure that I go on to explore Disco DAO and Super DAO is something we know, but that's amazing. I also really love the analogy you shared about the tree and the seeds and how that goes on to create a self-sustainable and thriving environment. But how do you think when DAOs already have such a compensation problem where they are providing tokens, but they're failing to provide workable income somewhere, like, you can't, at least right now, until you're in the top 1-2%, people are contributing to DAOs, but they can't like sustain themselves through DAOs. So where do you think things like grants are coming into place? Where would Bankless get its funds to be able to provide these grants to community members if they don't want a quick turnaround? Like you said, ROI wasn't something that they were too heavily concerned on.
Yeah, I think this gets into tokenomics, which I will say I know very little about. How are tokens created? How are they burned or not burned? Like, and that whole allocation is honestly kind of a mystery to me. So I think that's something that should probably be explored with another expert. But to go back to your broader question of like, how can people get paid for their worth? I think this is a really challenging issue in the space. Yeah. And I've experienced it firsthand. That was actually my biggest question going into this was, can I make an income? Can I replace my income with DAO work? Because I think at the time when I was kind of lurking, maybe May or April of last year, things were looking pretty good in the market, and people were starting to say, I quit my job to go full-time Web3. So this sounded like something you could do. In my experience, I think the only way to make that happen currently is if you can get onto a full-time contributor role within a DAO that pays in some sort of stable coin. Because even if they pay in their native token 100%, we've seen what can happen to those tokens. The Bankless token itself went down 90%. So we're getting grants on the Bounty Hunter or the Quorum side now, but the tokens, it's kind of like fun money. I believe in Bankless and I believe in what we're doing, but it doesn't can't pay the groceries, right? So I think it's a big question out there that we still have, and I think it goes back to kind of this differentiation between DAOs that are meant to be grants and public goods versus DAOs that are more business and ROI focused. So if you want to find some place that has a better chance of funding your work, go to where the funding is. Find a DAO or DAO tooling company that has funding, dollars or other sort of, non-crypto assets as well, and see if you can work your way into that.
Thanks so much for answering that. So just to give context to the guys, right? Brendan was running this podcast with Bankless. And instead of getting paid in stable coins or fiat, he was getting paid in Bankless tokens. And that's where the whole conversation on workable incomes started coming into place, that yes, DAOs can provide you tokens, but what value do those tokens have? And also noting, of course, down the volatility of the token. So Brendan, what was your emotional reaction when the Bankless token almost went like 90% down? Like, what made you still stay?
Well, I guess, part of it maybe is some privilege that I can afford to work some time in Bankless and not have it have to be my full-time job. So I wasn't relying on the space to prop me up. I know that's not the case for a lot of people, and a lot of people can't make the jump because they're not sure whether they can make that happen. So I think there is some privilege to acknowledge there on my side. But, I was kind of like, it's like buying a stock that you think is going to do pretty well, and then, just like drops off the face of the planet. And you're like, oh, I guess I was totally wrong. Like, what do I know? So part of me was kind of just up in arms, like, okay, I guess it is what it is. But, ultimately I wasn't there for the money. Like, the money was icing on the cake for me. I wanted to learn about the space. I'm excited about the technology. I'm excited about how this space is going to revolutionize the way that people work together in the future. So to me, like, in order to make it work for me long term and be able to put full-time energy, which I'm not right now, into it, it would need to be able to pay me, a fair salary, which is what most people would ask and what most people need. So I think at this point, the easiest way to get involved is you moonlight. You work, before or after work, and you do what you can.
I think it's one of the greatest way to invest your time, right? There are different ways to incentivize people, and monetary compensation is just one way, because if you're into DAO, you're not in it for the money. And Brendan, we absolutely believe in Bankless. You being token rich is going to translate into you being rich. So we have no doubt about that.
Either way, it's fine. It's okay.
That's amazing. Community, the awesomest thing about Discord Spaces is that you get to ask your questions to our guest live. So be sure to drop them in the chat. And Brendan, we have a question from Aurora Borlis. He says, can you read the chat? Do you see this one?
Do you want me to answer directly?
Yeah, we can read out the question. Aurora Borlis said that I actually want to get my way around in Bankless. Anyone can you put in a word with?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just give you a high level of how Bankless works. So Bankless is great because it is on the side of like mostly decentralized, like on centralized to decentralized. It's like pretty much at the top of that curve. So what that means is there's a level of permissionlessness that doesn't exist in more centralized DAOs. And so the way that it works is if you're interested in checking out Bankless, you can go to their Discord and get a guest pass for free. And I think it's 7 days. You have to complete some onboarding tasks and stuff. At least that's what I did about a year ago. I think it's since tweaked a little bit. But then from there, you can basically, after your 7 days, if it expires, you just have to ask someone who is a member to give you access again. So you don't need any, you kind of just have to, it's a way for them to nudge you towards like making connections in Bankless, which I think is pretty clever. If you don't know anybody after 7 days, like maybe, you need to try to make some connections. So yeah, it's super easy to get involved. You can jump into any meetings that are open, which are most of them. So I totally recommend hopping in there, checking out the community call on Friday, and seeing like what resonates with you, which guild you'd like to or department you'd like to contribute to.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We have a bunch of community questions, guys. We will just hop on to them. We will cover some mid-level questions and then we'll jump onto the community section because that's the most fun part. But before that, Brendan, I'd love to ask you, Discord is something that's super messy for everyone, but I'm curious to know, like, what is your version of it? How is it that you tackled with Discord? How is it that you played around with it? And what was one of the biggest pain points for you to like navigate in this DAO system as a contributor?
Yeah, what's difficult is that everybody organizes them differently. So if you get used to DaoLens' Discord, you go to Bankless and you're like, what is this? So
Yes.
yeah, it requires you to like actually dig into things. I think honestly, this might not be super popular, but I think Discord works relatively well for the most part. Given that you can host, 10 plus thousand people to, hundreds of thousands of people in one like software and organize events and do, community calls and like, so I think the software itself works pretty well. But some of the challenges that I've had, prior to this call, I had my full podcast mic set up, ready to go. I was going to try to give y'all the best audio quality I possibly could, and I couldn't get it connected to Discord. So I don't do the recordings on Discord. I do them on a podcasting platform. So I haven't used it for Discord anyway. So there's some connectivity issues like that, but generally speaking, I think the hardest part is to figure out how to navigate around the space and how to make your way through the Discord. One tool that people are using to kind of solve this is called Sobel. If you want to check that out, Bankless has a Sobel, but basically what it is a visual map. So think of it like if you go to a traditional...
How do you pronounce spell it?
It's SOBOL.
SOB.
Yeah, it's kind of a funky name, but the idea is like, let's visualize the departments to show where contributors are and who is where, because, we're visual creatures. We go to the Discord and it doesn't make sense intuitively. You have to poke around. So Sobel's cool because it can visually show you, here's the writing department, here's all the contributors, here's the marketing department or guild, if there's any overlap. It can help you explore and navigate the space a little quicker if that DAO is using it.
Super interesting. Yeah, I feel like such a interesting point. You get familiarized with one server, you hop on the next and you're like, what the hell is that? Because everyone's extremely, very, very differently structured. And in your entire journey of, you contributing to this DAO, what would you say are some of the biggest pain points that these DAOs face? You were running the Bounty Hunter podcast. You connected with so many DAO admins and, people who are really, really in the space. What is some issue that they mutually echoed that they were struggling with? As amazing as the space is, the systems are still pretty scattered. So what would that one thing be?
Yeah, the hardest part is onboarding, and that shouldn't be a surprise. You hear it all the time, but that is probably one of the biggest differences that I can see from what you might consider a fully centralized company like a startup versus a DAO, because the flow of people coming in and out of those entities is very different. With a startup, there's like small openings that you have to kind of fit yourself into, and then there's gatekeepers, to get those certain jobs. Yeah. But if you take the Bankless example, there's hundreds of people, maybe a month, coming into this Discord with nobody saying no, right? Everybody's saying yes, come in. And so it's just a totally different paradigm to be able to do that, but it requires new tactics and tools. And I think what a lot of people are struggling with is this balance between taking people on and trying to people are trying to find like automated ways to do the onboarding, because obviously it takes a lot of time and effort, especially if there's a lot of people. But that's at odds with what I think people actually want as a contributor. Like, when you join a new DAO, if you join Bankless, you want to talk to people, you want to meet people and make friends and make connections. So to me, those two feel kind of like they're at odds. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for DAOs right now, is to find that right balance of how much personal, like human touch can we give to these contributors, because that is really what keeps people, what keeps them engaged, is you make friends and you get excited about working with them, and it's just a different paradigm.
Absolutely. It's so interesting you say that. I've speaking with a lot of community managers from extremely successful, DAOs and servers where they have so many members, and a lot of them emphasize on hopping on one-on-one calls with their members. And I'm like, how do you guys do it?
Yep.
But that is something, when you see someone face to face, right, visually, you're able to build so much of a better relationship than seeing someone with a monkey face and a banana on the head called, Taco 69, and you're like, you have no relationship there. So I think that works amazingly. And also, that is the reason we developed our onboarding tool. And at this point, we've made it free, because this was an issue a lot of DAO admins echoed, like you correctly said, onboarding. Our onboarding tool is free. I'll just drop a link to it in the chat, and communities can, just it takes 3 minutes to deploy that flow. But what that really does is, and I feel like why it is so important, is when a new member joins, they're just lost. And not a lot of people are so Discord native. And even if they are, each Discord server looks different. So when you have this onboarding tool, it kind of helps you and directs you at the right place to go. So you also have a great user experience, firstly. And from the admin side, you get a structured community. You know who's there, what do those personas look like, where are they from. An interesting thing in our onboarding tool is also that, you can have different gatekeeping options. Like you have to have a certain level of, you have to have certain tokens to have a role. Maybe you want an interview process. Maybe you have to, submit a piece of work. So I feel like that is extremely important. Otherwise, you just have a bunch of 500-600 people and you have no idea what to do with them. That's amazing. If someone from the team can help drop a link in the chat to the onboarding tool, I feel like that'll be really helpful. So if someone wants to explore it, you can just go right there. But thanks so much for sharing that, Brendan. And we spoke about the whole workable incomes aspect, but what do you think DAOs can do to be able to provide? Because until you're providing workable incomes, you'll have few people who are passionate about it, but like you said, tokens don't pay for groceries. So you might miss out on this amazing talent of people who are there, who want to contribute to DAOs, but they don't have the bandwidth, to participate. So what is something that you feel like DAOs can do to be able to change that?
Yeah, I feel like the answer to compensation and onboarding, they're kind of really closely related so far, has been you go to a DAO, you read their documents, you see how you can add value, you hop on the community call, you offer to solve problems, and then a community manager notices you. Somebody, or a talent scout, somebody on their team says, hey, this person's adding value. Can we highlight them? Can we bring them up? Can we showcase them in some way? What I like about that is that it's kind of organic. It requires people to kind of, try stuff out and see if things, see if it's working for them. And then the community can kind of resonate and bring them up into the fold. What I don't like about that is that you don't know how much you're going to get paid. You don't know if you'll get paid at all. You don't know what your roles and responsibilities are. So it's kind of like wading into a swamp where you're like, I hope this takes me to the treasure chest on the other end, but I don't really know if it will. There's a funny quote by Brandon Kumar from Layer 3, which is a cool product as well, for finding ways to contribute without having to go into DAOs. And he says, DAO onboarding is like walking through barbed wire, because at every stage you can kind of trip up and you can get messed up. And it's true. And compensation is one of those things that I think more DAOs should just be explicit about what they want, what they need. It's one thing to have a bounty board and just to say, here are the things we can do and here's how much they'll cost. But what about roles and responsibilities? How much will you pay, for a contributor to do this? And can you make that transparent for people to peruse, just as you might look at a job board on somebody's company? So I think the answer to me comes down to more transparency with compensation. So you can give people an idea of what to expect. If you have no idea what to expect, you might be completely off, your mark, with how much you need to work and what you think you're worth.
Absolutely. I think it's such an important point for DAOs to be very, very explicit and very clear with, what the roles are, what the responsibilities, what the compensation is, so that there's less room for disappointments on both the parties. And also they'll get the right, right set of contributors which match, the kind of roles, responsibility and compensations, one is looking for.
Yeah.
Also,
I'll say too, I think we're getting to this trend as well in the Web2 space, because more and more, at least in the US, more states are pushing for transparency within job posts. Like the fact that you don't have to post how much the salary is on a job post is kind of crazy. Like how much do you spend going through a normal job interview, to get to the other side to realize it's not worth it, not worth your time. So I think that's the way everything's moving, not just Web3.
Absolutely. Yeah, for some reason people struggle to have these money conversations and they try to, I don't know why, drift away and, hide that factor. But transparency is something that's extremely important and definitely point noted. I'd love to even ask your perspective on bounties. Your podcast was literally called Bounty Hunters. And bounties was super popular, early 2022, late 2021. But now they seem to be dying down. You would have all these bounties listed on platforms and people don't seem to be participating in them. Why do you feel like that's happening? Is it because DAOs are struggling to provide workable, incomes? Because I feel like when we initially looked at bounties, they very much reminded me of Fiverr. And I felt like that is so amazing if, freelancers can participate and work, in a bounty format in a DAO. So why do you think that's kind of dying down?
I think it's just the market, to be honest. Companies can't afford to pay as much and people need more money than they ever did because of inflation. So, there's that kind of macro trend that's happening. I 100% think there's a space for bounties to exist within the overall compensation of Web3 for a contributor. What it boils down to for me, I think, is kind of the attitude of the contributor. When you are a bounty hunter, you kind of have I'm going to kind of pick and choose what I want to work on, and I get to do this thing and that thing. And it's saying that it's kind of like scraps. Isn't doing it justice, because there are bigger projects you can do, but there's a lot of overhead, I think, that comes into play when you're doing bounties, because you have to learn a new client, right? You have to learn a new DAO or project, whoever. So I think some of that isn't factored into the actual idea of trying to get bounties. I would love to see more roles, more transparency under the roles, and things happening within DAOs. But I still think bounties have a place. I think they'll come back once the market comes back. But I personally, I like the idea of having more connection with the people I'm working with, getting to work with them regularly. Imagine if you do a couple bounties for someone and then they're like, okay, great, we'll see you later. And you just go off and it's like, well, now you got to find another client that you really like. And you're kind of stuck in the same space that people are now with typical freelance work, which is finding great clients can be really difficult. So if you find one, you want to stick with them. And that's kind of what getting a more traditional job is like.
Absolutely. That's such an interesting point, right? You end up working at a freelancer project and you might loving someone, and then that project comes to a close and where do you go from there? I also really, really believe that bounties will come back once the market is back on, because it's one of the most empowering way for so many people who are wanting to freelance and so many people wanting to do remote work, where they can just empower themselves with doing their passion projects and then stepping away. I think it's incredible. And I'd love to hop on to some community questions for us now.
Yes, please.
Let's hop in the chat. And we have this question from Almas. Please excuse me if I am not pronouncing your name correctly, but would you like to read out the question?
Yeah, it says, where can I look or find for more resources on building DAO, be it framework, white paper, roadmap, tokenomics? Resources on DAOs. I think what I said a little bit earlier about SuperDAO, I think is a great resource for a lot of people. I also I can't remember how to say their name, Masari.
Oh yeah,
It's a crypto research platform.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me type that in here.
Oh.
Yeah, nice. They have a whole section on research on DAOs specifically. You can look into Web3, NFTs. So that's kind of like more technical stuff for your answer. I also I personally like to learn through podcasts. So I would just type in, like if it's tokenomics, I would just type in tokenomics on YouTube or tokenomics on a podcast and see what pops up. YouTube is nice because it has also, crowdsourced, aggregated, social proofed stuff. This is something I wish podcast had, which was, if you type tokenomics into a podcast player, you can't tell which podcast is worth listening to, unfortunately. But I don't know. I do a ton of learning on YouTube, so I would also say there.
Yes. Then we have a question from Alex. Would you like to read that out?
Where are we here, Alex? Yes. What are the opportunities for someone looking to contribute to DAOs as a community steward? Alex, do you mean like a community manager type person?
I believe so.
Okay. Yeah. This is one of the hottest jobs in Web3. So yeah, if that has any interest to you at all, you're in the right industry for sure. And the reason that is because we're moving from an era where community was kind of an afterthought for a lot of companies to where community is at the core, or if not at the core, centrally built in the middle of the company somewhere. So it's more integrated into what these Web3 companies are doing, because we're realizing that there's so much value in having diversity of thought and being able to raise talent from within. So community management is huge. There's somebody who's really great at it. I heard her speak. I think she has her own podcast, Alicia from ENS.
Yes.
I can't remember what her show is called, but she does a great job with ENS. And if you want to learn about what community management is really like, I would check out some of her interviews. But yeah, I see tons of community management jobs out there for people because there's so few people with that skill set and so many DAOs looking for that person. So yeah, that's a great skill to learn for this new industry.
I was just today listening to Alicia's podcast, the one she conducted with Nick, and she's phenomenal. I am just gonna drop a link of that in the chat.
Okay, great, yeah.
She's been working with ENS DAO, so she's doing a lot of video stuff from them. But otherwise, she runs her own podcast as well. So that's something you guys should definitely check out.
Yeah, if you want to learn about her, listen to her on other people's podcasts, though.
Oh, perfect. That too. Alex says, I still feel a lot of DAOs aren't doing enough community experience design-wise.
What do you mean by community experience design? Can you elaborate? Proper framework to keep the engagement levels high, too many lurkers. Yeah, and this goes back to onboarding too. So I think it's partly on the community manager, but also on the DAO itself to find ways to, make things interesting. One of the DAOs, if you really want to learn about that, Alex, a DAO to check out probably is Forefront. So Forefront has a really very community-driven organization. They went through Seed Club, which is all about community-driven organizations. So I had a great experience going through Forefront as a contributor and just kind of seeing how they brought people on. So I went on a community call, just said hi, tried to add some value, and one of the the community managers reached out to me and just said, hey, we recognize that you were trying to add value. We'd love to bring you on to speak at our next event. We're highlighting people from the community. So that's one way that you can do it, is pull people up from the community, highlight them, get them engaged and involved, and if you want to experiment with that, if you want to experience that, check out Forefront. They also have a lot of cool. Their labs is really cool. Forefront Labs is like a experimental mischief-esque platform where they try to create new things that's totally bottoms up. So they'll have, let's fix government, and you just kind of like go in there and throw ideas on the wall, and like, things are wacky and people are, just throwing crazy stuff out there. But over time, they come up with some ideas that you can actually maybe even implement and try to execute on. So it's a really fun community to be involved in. Would highly recommend it.
That's amazing. Recently our product team has developed this really interesting community management bot. So what happens is, like, this bot will be deployed in your server, and it starts sending people these nudges. Oh, you've not responded in 6 days. Hope everything's okay. You haven't responded in a month. How is it that we can help you? So that reminds them. Next is, it also encourages people to have a leaderboard. So, oh, you've been super active. And because you're on the leaderboard, and you are signed in, it gives you an NFT in your wallet and stuff like that, right? To, again, incentivize people for engaging in the community. These small ways, I feel like, are amazing for you to get your community management floating. I feel like for the human relationships thing, scheduling one-on-one calls is amazing, but you'll also have a amazing structure to your community, and it also helps, like, great reminder, because people sometimes join like 20, 30, 50 servers, and they can't possibly be engaging in every. So I feel like this bot situation is really cool, which kind of makes them know that there's someone like looking after me, there's someone checking up on me. So if you're interested in that, highly recommend join our Discord and introduce yourself in the introduction channel. Let us know if you're interested in stuff, and someone from our business development team or our product team will reach out. I feel like that was one of the most amazing things I saw our product team develop, because I am managing our community here itself, and it's extremely valuable, and you can't keep a tab on 900 thousands of people, so I feel like that's a really interesting problem that has been solved.
That's great. That's awesome.
I'm going to share that with you as well. Also, Almus asked, any good service DAOs that are to be must followed and a must check out?
Yeah, the one I think that gets the most press is also the most interesting to me, Vector DAO. They've got a couple of founders who are very smart. It's very design focused. So if that's your jam, I think it's also maybe developer designer. But listen to a podcast about them, see if that jives with you. They've been able to land some pretty great clients, and I think are a little particular about who they bring on. So that's one of those where a little more centralized. There's some filters to get through the onboarding. But if you do, you make it into a group with a really high bar of talent. So I would be on the lookout for what they're up to. I also hear good things about Mycelium is a marketing DAO, if that's your jam as well. I haven't personally had any interaction, or I spoke to one of the founders, but haven't interacted within the DAO itself. So I'm curious what they're up to as well. They said they were building a bunch of new tools around marketing in Web3.
Brendan, thank you so much for, I think you were looking at the article, but I was just saying thank you so much for taking on these community questions. But a few things, and one of the last things I'd love to ask you is, beyond DAO, beyond Web3, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about mental health, because I know that you are pursuing your passion, with the Bounty Hunter and now Quorum podcast with Bankless DAO. I don't know if you guys know, Brendan is also a dad, so he has a kid. You're also a husband. You are so many things. So you're wearing so many hats. How are you managing your time? I would love for you to talk a little bit about mental health.
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. I know a lot of people I've spoken to have gotten burnt out, or people have posted on Twitter about burnout. And I think it's because we're transitioning from, working with a more regular schedule to the barriers between work and life are just blurring. And in some ways that's great because you can work more flexibly, but in other ways it's challenging because you have to set up boundaries. And I know a lot of people haven't built up those skill sets. I have been fortunate to work remotely for a while now. And I still struggle sometimes with working too late or, taking on too many projects. So it's definitely a struggle for me. some of the things that I have found to work is just kind of figuring out like what my typical rhythm is when I do my best work, and when I don't do my best work, I do other things. So for me, I find that in the morning I'm the freshest. I'm not a night owl. I get up and I'm kind of ready to go.
Yeah.
So I like to set my day, set my agenda, and kind of like get into the biggest, ugliest task I have on the agenda. And then in the afternoon, I always try to take time to work out or go for a run or go in the sauna. I love, just kind of getting a sweat on. These are like not like earth-shattering ideas here, but it's the regularity that has to come in, because it's easy to say, oh, well, I'll just put it off for today and I'll just take this extra meeting, or I'll put, it's easy to make health the last priority, I think, when work is always available. Yeah. And especially as a founder or contributor in Web3, you can easily put in 60, 70, 80 hours, into a project and not even think twice about it. Well, maybe if you don't have a family, but it's challenging for everybody. And, you got to find those times where you can rest and recharge without a screen. If I'm taking a break with a screen, it's not really a break. That's my thought, at least.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with the regularity aspect and also staying away from screens. I feel like we're in front of the screens all the time, and the way we take break is like watch Netflix or watch YouTube videos.
Right.
Which is not really a break, but going out for a walk and exercise sounds really simple, but has really like amazing impact. So I'm super happy that you have found a routine for yourself and you're learning how to juggle all these things and taking time for yourself. And I feel like it's super important advice for everyone here as well, because Web3 is intense, right? It requires a lot of time, attention, kind of always keeping a tab on what's going on. The space is always evolving by the minute. But don't forget to take a breather. You're still early. As amazing as ambition is, I think we should also be self-aware that if we don't make enough time for ourselves, like, you'll burn out. And more than anything, we will not be doing our best work if you're not rested. You'll not be able to be creative. You'll not be able to innovate. So thank you so much for sharing that, Brendan, and being so transparent. And thank you so much for coming on, making time and sharing amazing, valuable insights, and also your story and how it all started. Any ending thoughts? Would love to hear.
I just want to say thanks. Thanks for having me on. Thanks to the DaoLens community. I think what y'all are building is super relevant. Obviously, I named onboarding as one of the biggest issues in DAOs, so you're heading in the right direction there. And thanks all community members for your participation in this hangout. It was really fun to have y'all. And if you have any follow-up questions for me, feel free to reach out on Twitter. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction or give you some tips or anything that I can do to help you out. Just want to say thank you. Hope you all have a wonderful day. It's been a pleasure being here, and y'all rock. So have a great day.
Thank you so much, Brendan. Guys, I have linked Brendan's Twitter in the chat. Make sure you give him a follow. Make sure his DMs are open so you can reach out to him directly there. I see people asking for my Twitter. I am going to send it to you in a second. Also, guys, if you're new to our Discord, make sure you go on the Start Here channel and onboard. What you'll not see our Discord otherwise, because we've integrated our own DaoLens onboarding product. You'll have a customized Discord open for you. If there are two roles, captains and soldiers. Captains are DAO admins, soldiers are contributor. If you're a DAO admin, you'll see certain channels. And if you are a contributor, which is a soldier, you'll see certain channel. So just to make sure you're not seeing hundreds of different irrelevant channels. You will go through the onboarding process. You'll get your customized role. You will come across the server map and all of the good stuff. So make sure you onboard, and that's when Discord will populate before you. So also, if you have any questions at all, reach out to me directly on my DMs, and you can, if you have just DAO related, Bankless related, and Quorum related questions, you can directly reach out to Brendan. So whatever
you got, yeah.
Whatever you got. make sure to onboard on the Start Here channel. But otherwise, Brendan, it was an absolute pleasure to host you. I look forward to more collaborations, and thank you for doing this. Have a great rest of the week, and all the best for everything that you're building in your new journey towards Quorum. So excited to see that evolve.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Y'all have a wonderful day. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for attending. Bye. Have a lovely, lovely week. See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.